Hello, 1199 New England. My name is Dan, and I am the delegate from Butler Hospital's call center. And I am here today with a very special episode of Delegate Dan, the return of Delegate Dan for many. Um, and yeah, it is an interview with one of our candidates that our union has endorsed. So these are just, I just want to go over some questions to really just help elucidate why the Attorney General's race is so important. So I am joined today by Keith Hoffman, who we endorsed just last week. Um, so real quick, for those of you that know this channel, that know, uh, I'd run this channel during the strike last year. I've had a bit of time away for many, perhaps a bit too long, but I am back at the special request of our union to just try and help people understand why the Attorney General's race, which can often kind of fall into the background, is an important race for those of us who work in healthcare. I mean, it's important for everyone, but why specifically it is important for healthcare. Um, so, just as a sort of uh, uh, disclaimer, or really just because, this is run by me. It was requested by the union, but this is this was my work, and these are, this is my interview questions and such. Um, I want to make it clear, like, I'm not a journalist. I'm not a news network. Um, and I have biases. This is a candidate that I personally support. I think he would make a capable attorney general. I think he is, looking out for the interests of Rhode Islanders and especially workers and especially healthcare workers. So, this is not exactly hardball. I'm not, this isn't an excoriation of who he is and what he's trying to do. This is just something that I think is helpful for hopefully all of you. And I'm just trying my best, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's informative. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Keith Hoffman, Attorney General candidate for Rhode Island. All right, hello everybody. This is Keith Hoffman. He is the 1199 New England endorsed candidate for Attorney General for the state of Rhode Island. Keith, very glad to have you on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into, you know, what what the importance of the AG's office is, what this race means for healthcare workers like us and beyond. But why don't we start with just telling us a little bit about yourself, Keith? How have things been going, what's been going on?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dan. And well, first of all, I'm just so thrilled to have 1199's endorsement in this critical race for Attorney General. A little bit about me, I grew up in Rhode Island. I left for college and law school and then came back home with my wife, Rachel, to work in the AG's office. I've been there for many years. I rose up the ranks and ultimately was a unit chief and then on the executive team as Peter Nerona's chief of policy and senior counsel. And I left the attorney general's office to run just about a year ago. And in the AG's office, I was doing a lot of work that I think is so critical to the future of the state, and that we need to continue fighting for from the AG's office. I worked on healthcare matters. I worked and actually led the fight against the Trump administration's overreach here in Rhode Island that certainly has had real impacts on the healthcare system. And I fought corporate greed that harms consumers. And I just believe that this office can be such a force for good in our state, which is why I've decided to run and why I'm so thrilled that the great fighters and advocates and workers of 1199 are standing shoulder to shoulder with me in this race.
Absolutely. All right, so yeah, I'm just going to go through a few questions and hopefully we can get a better understanding of the real importance. So, Most people they have an intuitive understanding of the importance of the governor's office or of the Speaker of the House and how they can shape healthcare through policy. But perhaps not everyone, uh, you know, knows exactly how the Attorney General's role fits into that, how they
Right.
can affect healthcare. Um, I just wanted to give you some space to kind of, in general, explain what is the people's lawyer's role in healthcare.
Yeah, so the Attorney General's office has this really crucial role in our state's healthcare system. And I think that a lot of Rhode Islanders are just learning about this actually because it's a power that really wasn't used in the past until we began to these last 7, 8 years. And the attorney general's office, as you said, is the people's lawyer. And my goal when elected is to be the people's lawyer. What that means is we will fight for everyday working Rhode Islanders from the attorney general's office. We will fight for a cleaner environment. We will fight for civil rights and equal rights for all of us. We will fight for consumer protection and against these corporate bad actors that are, unfairly raising prices and scamming folks. And we will fight for access to quality, affordable healthcare. And we have really important and really powerful tools to do that in Rhode Island that we have used a number of times over the last 8 years, both in the proposed merger of CNE and Lifespan, now Brown Health, and then in the Raj Williams and Fatima situation with Prospect, and in other cases as well. And it's just so critical that we use these powers to fulfill the responsibility that I believe the Attorney General has to fight for all of us here in Rhode Island and making sure everybody has access to the healthcare they need.
Absolutely. Yeah, you've mentioned that you were part of Peter Nerona's office, and you mentioned that you were there during the Care New England Lifespan merger. Uh, a lot of us, I was working at Butler at that time. Um, and it's clear that he identified it as a bad deal for Rhode Islanders, and I think rather bravely shot it down. Um, and I just want to know, you were in the office at the time, what your
Yeah.
takeaways were from it, how that informed your understanding of the Attorney General and how it informs you moving forward to potentially become the Attorney General.
Yeah. Well, so I was in the office at the time. I worked on that and other healthcare conversions and proposed mergers over the years. And I think that we absolutely made the right decision in that particular case. You know, when we think about the healthcare market in Rhode Island, it's not very big. There are not too many players in it, not too many health hospital systems in it. And so it's really important that we not create more of a monopolistic sort of market here, because when you do that, what can happen is it can do the worst thing that all of us want to avoid, which is reduce patient access to quality healthcare. And, why would that happen? Well, if you create a healthcare system with 85% market share in Rhode Island, that really is, monopoly or a monopsony player. Well, what could happen? Prices could go up for healthcare, quality could go down for healthcare. And by the way, often what we see in sort of monopoly or monopoly like markets is wages are depressed too because there isn't as much competition for labor. That's actually one of the reasons why quality goes down, because people who are paid to do the incredible work, for example, in this case of healthcare workers, are paid less. And so, of course, they there won't be as many people that are able to perform the job, et cetera. So it's really important that we look at these sorts of hospital conversions or mergers really closely. I mean, that's one takeaway, and there are others too. It was just about how you do it as a lawyer, but you have to look at them very, very closely and make sure that really we are keeping as the North Star access for patients to quality, affordable healthcare. And if we are not focused on that, then we run the risk of a really devastatingly bad decision for our state that could have terrible impacts for workers, of course, also for patients, and for access to care for all of us.
Yeah, it was a huge concern because it would also create a single employer, which means if you're a young person in healthcare and you make a mistake and you get fired, well, that's the one employer for basically the whole state. So you would end up moving to Massachusetts or Connecticut to continue your career. Um, and what you would see is just talent drain, right? Which is already a problem.
Yep.
Massachusetts already attracts a lot of talent,
Right.
Connecticut as well.
Have you seen this, Dan, where, have you had colleagues sort of leave the state to go work elsewhere? Or did you see that happening during the proposed merger where people were just trying to get ahead of it, thinking it might happen?
Uh, I think people held on. I think people were like, I like, we already it was already there was actually kind of the opposite issue of we had a number of people who before Care New England bought up all the hospitals that they had who would work at Butler and Kent and then, because then all of their hours would be overtime because it's now one employer they basically had to give up on that and then go
Mm,
get a second job over at Brown University Health. So I had already kind of seen, this thing happen where, oh, look, now the talent is leaving, but it's staying within the state. But so I didn't see as much migration outward, but there was some serious potential for that to happen.
right,
Um,
right. Yeah, my wife is the director of women's dermatology at Brown,
yes.
and you know, what we have seen in the healthcare system in this state, both like in stories that you hear, but also in the data that you see, is that there is at least some migration of workers out of state, and that the reimbursement models in Massachusetts and in Connecticut, people tend to be paid much better, and it's really just not a sustainable position for our healthcare system. It's a huge problem where we have got to make sure, especially in primary care, that people are just paid what they should be paid for the honest day's work that they're doing and the amazing work that they're doing for patients. And so, one thing that I was really proud of was a legislative initiative that I led to increase Medicaid reimbursement
Yes.
in Rhode Island a couple of years ago, ultimately around $50 million increase. But that, as I said at the time, really was not enough. Even it was stabilizing the situation at a time when primary care practices around the state were closing, but it really wasn't enough to get at the root problem here, and really begin to put us as people who care about healthcare in a position to really be able to serve patients here as they should be served.
Yeah, I mean, I could certainly talk for hours and hours and hours about Medicaid reimbursement. But I think we'll keep it a bit focused and
Yep.
not just let this be a regular Delegate Dan talking into the mic episode. But
We'll touch on that another time.
yes. So, obviously a major moment for many of us in 1199, especially for me and my colleagues at Butler, was I don't know if you heard, there was a bit of a strike last year. Um,
Yeah.
and, you know, we uh, we faced a lot of challenges during that strike. Um, there was a lot of concerns about who's keeping an eye like within the hospital, is enforcement being done effectively? I had been in meetings with the Department of Health, um, And not I didn't always walk away with a ton of confidence, but it was a strike. It was a chaotic event. Um, and so I guess I just want to, understand. It's important for me and I think my viewers to understand, where's the line where like the AG's office, you know, like ends, where does like other agencies begin? Is healthcare, exclusively the domain of the Department of Health? How do we really see the AG's office operating in these kinds of scenarios?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the AG's office uh, definitely has a role to play in situations like this. But before getting into that, I just want to say, you know, that strike, which I know was just a tremendous undertaking and burden for the workers who did it. What I think we've all seen after with the contract that you got is, as you all said when you were out there on the picket. Um, we have seen, I believe, reduced turnover. We have seen patient care quality increase, right? Reduced assaults, et cetera. And that is, just so critical that workers have the ability to strike and have the ability to um, let the public know about the problems that they are seeing and that they are experiencing. And so we can't have a situation where, you know, workers who are on strike, like at Butler, um, are unable or feel unable to do that because patient care will decline during the strike. And so, you know, in my view, the certainly the role of the Department of Health and the Attorney General's office separately is to ensure that the laws are followed, and by which I mean the laws around, safe staffing, around providing adequate patient care. And I think it's really important that here in Rhode Island, we not look at enforcement of laws around healthcare as only a Department of Health issue for a lot of reasons. But one of the really good ones is that, in the Attorney General's office, this is what we specialize in. We focus on the enforcement of laws, whether they are criminal laws or civil laws. We have the ability to bring court actions to redress problems when we see them and when they're brought to us. And I think that where the system really can work best is where, we are able to work with our partners at the Department of Health to address problems that might happen, for example, within a healthcare entity during a strike to make sure that patients are still getting the care that they need. But if that department is, unable to move, that we're able in the Attorney General's office to do that ourselves. Using the tools that we have. And I think that is the position that will put, the patients in the best possible position to make sure that, of course, the workers who care for them are able to advocate for a fair wage, but ensuring that they can get access to the care that they need in the meantime.
Wow, excellent. Um, you know, so I also, a lot of times when I talk, when I would talk to the news on the strike or give opinions in these videos, I always like to explain how issues are linked, right? So healthcare is inextricably linked to basically every other social issue.
Right.
Housing, the economy, even public transit is actually a very important connection to our job and to our patients.
Right.
Um, so, you know, when so to broaden things out a bit, when mass layoffs happen, the job market, falls through. We'll see homelessness, substance abuse, uptick as things get worse, which then has a cascading effect of creating more pressure on the healthcare system as now all of a sudden more people, are
Right.
rushing into what I consider the last line of the safety net, right? When everything else fails, people show up to the hospital, any hospital,
Right. Right.
and I wanted to give you some time to kind of go over what you feel is the AG's office in some of these wider issues and how what your office can do to, sort of lift the pressure off.
Right. You know, I totally agree with you. I think that, what we want to do is, to the extent possible, from the Attorney General's office, and of course we don't have every tool available, but we have some really important ones, you know, make sure that people are able to live a good life and reduce those pressures that will lead to them winding up in the emergency room, right? And it's so important that we look at the Office of the Attorney General as a really key player in that. And this is the vision for the Attorney General's office that I have, that Peter Nerona had as well. And I don't want to go off on for too long on this, but I'll just tell you a story, Dan, which is that before I came back home, I was a legal aid lawyer in New York, and I worked um, mostly out of VA medical centers, but often other medical centers, and ran a team of lawyers doing work to make sure that people had access to healthcare and housing. And what I saw is exactly what you are talking about, which is that people wound up often in situations where they needed care due to these other things happening in their life: unemployment, lack of safe, affordable housing, etc. And in New York, there was, at the time and still is, a really strong, really effective Attorney General's office. And in Rhode Island, I had worked in this office, in the Attorney General's office, in college as a law clerk in law school. We didn't have that yet. So Peter Nerona on the campaign trail in 2018 was talking about trying to build something more like that here in Rhode Island. And I was really motivated to be a part of that. And I came back home and joined the Attorney General's office and really helped to build that. It's what we call our Public Protection Bureau, that does all of our healthcare and consumer protection and antitrust and environmental protection and civil rights work. And this is the work of the Attorney General's office that, you know, candidly, like, Massachusetts has had for 20 or 30 years, and New York and Maryland and other states have had for a very long time. And we just really didn't have here in Rhode Island. And we now have an extraordinary team of lawyers doing this work to not just respond when we see a particular crisis, but try to move our state in a better direction. And so, of course, we are always in the Attorney General's office going to prosecute bad guys. If somebody breaks the law, we're going to be there to hold them accountable or seek a diversion in the appropriate case where it's a youthful or first-time offender. But what can we do to ensure that, just like you said, health, people winding up in the emergency department, what can we do to ensure that people don't wind up in jail? What can we do to make a better life for people here in this state? And I'll give you a couple of examples. What is going to happen when people are living in a community where dangerous toxins are spewed into their neighborhood from the time that they're a young child by a major polluter? Well, what's going to happen is that there are going to be increased rates of asthma. There are going to be increased risks of a whole host of other conditions. And we can put a stop to that. And we did through enforcement actions against Rhode Island recycled metals.
Right.
What is going to happen when a child is lead poisoned? There are a whole slew of negative health impacts for that child, but not just health, also in their ability to stay out of jail, ability to stay in school. And by the way, I don't want to, scare anybody too much. These are like population level studies that show this. So in any individual case for a child, we can work with that child and we can make sure that they can be lifted up. But when you look across the whole population, there's been a lot of excellent scholarship on this done at Brown and other places as well. You are going to see, when you have a large population of children who've been exposed to lead, that their educational achievement will go down, their earning potential will go down, their suspension rates will increase in school. Well, you know what we can do in the Attorney General's office? We can enforce the law against slumlords that put kids at risk of lead poisoning, and we can reduce the rates. And actually, we have done that over these last several years. So this is the sort of work that we can do, and I believe we have to do from the Attorney General's office to create the foundation for the future that will mean that yes, there are fewer people that are subjected to a life where unemployment becomes a constant drag, or their ability to stay out of jail becomes an issue. And I think that it's just a critically important part of being the people's lawyer that we were talking about earlier.
No, absolutely. I think the issue of lead is this thing that a lot of people feel has like kind of gone away. Like, oh yeah, we got rid of all the lead, it's all fine. But I think it still lurks in the background of society and it has real effects. No,
Yeah.
I definitely I understand what you mean there. Um,
And not just lead, but I'll just say that there are other things like this. My dad passed away from cancer linked to Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam. He was a Vietnam vet, and a lot of the vets were exposed to this toxin really during the war. And by the way, a lot of Vietnamese people as well, and suffered tremendously as a result, and their families too. And there are in our modern society, from lead, which usually the exposure that kids experience is in paint, but also PFAS, right? And we've
mhm,
filed lawsuits against the manufacturers of PFAS for all sorts of environmental degradation that can lead to health impacts for all of us. And mercury exposure. There are lots of things that we need to be on the lookout for, asbestos, and that we can and should from the Attorney General's office, making sure that we are holding these companies or other bad actors accountable when they are creating a really serious health risk for our communities through their actions.
absolutely. So, going to a sort of higher level here,
Sure.
it's, it's no secret that the federal administration has, made some very aggressive cuts, for funding for RI programs, uh, as well as other states, obviously, but within the scope of Rhode Island. You know, earlier this year, I sat in on town halls, Care New England town halls, um, and with the Care New England has felt some of this pain, um, as well as Brown University Health. Uh, Medicaid was affected pretty severely, and we were seeing real effects earlier in the year. Even in my role in the call center, we saw patient levels drop pretty significantly as there was a lot of chaos with people's Medicaid plans. People became very anxious, avoided treatment. Um, and so I want to, understand, uh, what is the AG's office done? What will it do under you if you're elected, to try and, protect Rhode Island from swings and shocks that come out of, disruptive movements from the federal level?
Yeah, well, it's a really important question. And by the way, Dan, with 1199 beside me, it's when we're elected. But
Yes, yes.
look, this is a really important question and a really important topic. Um, and on the federal overreach that we've seen over the last couple of years, I think that it's first really important to point out that, this isn't about a disagreement with the administration over some matter of policy. That is, I certainly personally have disagreement with the administration on a number of policies. But when we're talking about the Attorney General's role in this really crucial effort, it is not about that. It's about when the federal government oversteps, when they break the law or violate the Constitution, and it harms Rhode Islanders, and the Attorney General has the ability to step in and to help those Rhode Islanders. we must do that. And I believe that very firmly. We have to find a way to do all of the work that we've been talking about today, but also preserve our state budget, preserve Rhode Islanders' access to crucial benefits, their fundamental rights when they are at risk through the administration's actions. So I was put in charge of leading that effort in both the planning for the second Trump administration, and then after the inauguration until I left to run. And I think that it's really important for folks to understand that, you know, what we're seeing right now out of the federal government is a lot of actions that are weakening our healthcare system, making a situation here in Rhode Island that was already in tough shape. And they're
Tenuous, yeah.
making those actions are making the situation here a lot more dire. And we are going to have to be prepared, of course, to, fight in court and win when we can. But we also have to just recognize that we are going to need to do certain things a little bit more effectively and aggressively here in Rhode Island because, for example, you mentioned Medicaid cuts. That is the sort of thing that's going to create more of that pressure to consolidate healthcare systems here in our state. And so when we see that pressure, we're just going to have to really effectively take a look, as I said before, at any proposed merger, and then knowing a really important thing, which is that when we talked about the CNE lifespan proposed merger back in the early 2020s, the FTC, which is the Federal Trade Commission, was right there alongside us in the Attorney General's office. And when we blocked the merger, they did as well. That is very unlikely to happen during this administration. And so when there is a proposed merger, really the Attorney General is likely to be there alone as sort of the check on any sort of action that could harm access to patients' care.
No, yeah. I mean, it is a shame where I think the FTC has kind of ended up on a personally for me. Um, but and so it is going to be important, you know, that the next Attorney General will be ready to have those sort of fights. Um, so moving on to an issue that's very close to us in 1199 is safe staffing.
Yeah,
I'm sure we help secure a safe staffing research commission through the
right.
State House. Um, this is an issue that's very close to our hearts. It's about safety.
Yep,
It's about preventing race to the bottom sort of care within the healthcare network. Um, and the hope is that we can move this forward into an actual law that can or policy that can keep our hospitals safe, keep our staff safe, and continue providing quality care for Rhode Islanders. um, if theoretically this ends up going where we would like it to go, what is the AG's role after such a thing is passed? How does that play into enforcement? What do you see as the important key that the AG can play in that sort of scenario?
yeah. So first of all, it's amazing work by 1199 to get the Safe Staffing Commission set up, and am really, really interested to see the findings. I agree with you that safe staffing is crucial, and that worker protections more broadly in our healthcare system and in our economy are crucial. And again, these are protections for workers that uh, when we're thinking about all the worker protections that are out there around workplace safety and fair wages, usually in Rhode Island we had relied on our federal partners to do that sort of enforcement. And they are not really doing that work anymore under this administration. So I think it's critical that we be prepared in the Attorney General's office to do that. And it's why I've proposed a worker protection unit that would be able to focus on issues like safe staffing. Now, we have I've advocated for this for years. We actually passed a bill several years ago that would have allowed us to enforce, just generally speaking, any law that was violated in the state, including something like safe staffing. That was ultimately vetoed by the governor. But the most important thing here is that we make sure, as I said earlier, that in the AG's office, we are enforcing laws that are there to protect patients, and safe staffing is one of them. And I think that what we're going to need to do is, um, just like we have done in many other areas, if there's a violation of safe staffing, the complaint ought to be, in my view, brought to the Attorney General's office. It could also be brought to the Department of Health or some other entity, but it brought to my office, and then we would be able to investigate, perhaps with the Department of Health, perhaps on our own, and then enforce the law when necessary. And laws in Rhode Island, native Rhode Islander, I love this place very much, and I've worked here for many years, but we have to make sure that laws around things like safe staffing or in the healthcare space more broadly are not just, you know, words on a page. Violating the law needs to have a consequence. And I think that what we have seen in other places in the country, and then in Rhode Island, in spaces where we have begun to enforce some of these laws, and sometimes in healthcare and sometimes in environmental protection or civil rights or lead safety or consumer protection, people just begin to follow the law. They see, okay, well, there's going to be a consequence. If we violate it, we're going to find a way to make it work. And I think that that's really critical. We continue that going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Keith. And
Thank you.
if you like, I can give you a few minutes, just give your general pitch for becoming the next AG to our members. As you know, you have our endorsement, and let us know if anyone wants to volunteer for your campaign, how they can reach out, how they can help.
Well, thank you so much, Dan. And I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think that we in Rhode Island are facing a series of really critical challenges. And I think that the Attorney General's office really is going to be at the tip of the spear for a lot of these challenges in ensuring that our state is protected from federal overreach, in ensuring that our healthcare system can provide quality, affordable care for patients, and ensuring that companies are held accountable when they unlawfully raise prices on medications or anything else. And that is why I am running, to make sure that we can create a safer and stronger and fairer state for everyone here. I am so thrilled to have 1199's endorsement, as I said earlier. And for anybody that would love to, that would like to help out in the campaign, we would love to have you. The website is www.keithhoffmann.com. So it's Keith Hoffman, Hoffmann, with two F's and two N's, which is a little bit of a funny spelling. And
I'm
you can
gonna put
find
I'll put the link in the description for the
awesome.
video.
All right. And yeah, we would love to have you, or get a lawn sign delivered to your home by our wonderful interns. And um, I will just say that the next 4 years are going to be critically important for our state, for our healthcare system, for a lot of the fights that we've been talking about today. And I am so excited at the opportunity to make progress for all of us. And while I'm also really just conscious of the great challenges and how much we're going to need all of our communities, including the amazing community of 1199, to come together, to fight together, to face these challenges together.
Well, thank you so much, Keith. Keith Hoffman, Attorney General candidate for Rhode Island. Thank you so much for coming on. You
Thank you,
have you
Dan.
you certainly have our support here at 1199. And if this gets out to the other SEIUs as well, Keith's our guy. I think you're going to be a great great attorney general for both workers and Rhode Islanders, consumer Rhode Islanders as well.
Thank you so
Uh,
much, Dan.
Thank you, and have a good day. And
You too.
thank you everybody for watching, and you have a great one.
Bye bye.